The city lights of New York blurred into streaks of orange and white as Ethan Cole hurried down the deserted streets of Lower Manhattan. His office in Tribeca had kept him late again, another all-nighter buried under spreadsheets and deadlines. He couldn't escape. Normally, he would have hailed a cab, but tonight, with the temperature hovering near freezing, the subway was the only option that made sense. Ethan's breath came in sharp white clouds. He tugged his coat tighter around his shoulders, his leather briefcase slapping against his thigh with each hurried step. The station entrance loomed ahead, a cold, concrete maw with flickering fluorescent lights and the low hum of distant trains. Only a few late-night commuters shuffled past him. Most had given up and retreated to warmer corners of the city. Descending the stairs, Ethan felt that familiar, uneasy vibration in his chest, the kind that comes when the city feels ... empty. Too empty. The station was mostly deserted, alone. Janitor mopped the tiles near the turnstiles, his eyes hollow and distant. Ethan swiped his Metro card, stepped through, and followed the echo of his footsteps down the platform. The train was already there. Its metallic doors hissed open, a long, cold exhale into the silent station. Ethan moved quickly toward the nearest car, shivering, grateful for the small warmth of the interior. But as he slid the door shut behind him, a prickle ran down his spine. He glanced around and realized something impossible. The car was empty, not just nearly empty, completely, utterly devoid of life. His heart began to hammer. Usually, even at this hour, someone would be sitting quietly, earbuds in, scrolling on their phones. But tonight, nothing. Silence. Ethan moved toward the front of the car, seeking a seat, when a soft mechanical voice crackled through the train's PA system. Next stop, Fulton Street. The doors slid closed. The train lurched forward. Ethan's fingers dug into the edge of the seat. As it picked up speed, he noticed it's something sitting on the opposite bench. A man, or what looked like a man. He was unnervingly still, his posture impossibly rigid. Jeans, dark jacket, and a pale, gaunt face that seemed almost sculpted from stone. The man's eyes were enormous, too large for a normal human face, dark and unblinking, and he was staring straight at Ethan. Ethan's stomach tightened. He told himself it was nothing, some drunk commuter, someone who had fallen asleep mid-ride. But the longer he stared, the more wrong it felt. The man didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't even seem to breathe. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. He laughed nervously to himself, shaking his head. Get a grip, man. It's just a guy. But as the train slowed for the next stop, a soft metallic hiss announced Fulton Street, and Ethan's blood froze. When the doors slid open, the platform was empty. Not one person, not even the janitor who had been there earlier. The cold air rushed in, sharp and biting, and the man had moved. Now he was standing at the edge of the bench, just a few feet away, staring at Ethan with that same horrifyingly wide smile. Ethan's mind raced. The train doors began to close, but he wasn't ready to move. He wanted to scream, but his throat had gone dry. The lights above flickered once, twice, then settled. For a moment, everything seemed normal. To normal. Then, a soft tapping sound began from the far end of the car. 1, 2, 3. Each tap perfectly timed, deliberate. The man began to move toward him in a way that didn't look human. His limbs bent at unnatural angles, gliding over the floor like a marionette. Ethan scrambled to the nearest door, slamming against the emergency handle. Nothing. The train continued its quiet glide through the tunnels, deeper into darkness, and Ethan realized, with sudden gut-churning horror, that the car was no longer empty. The walls themselves seemed to stretch, shadows crawling along the ceiling, whispering things he couldn't make out. The temperature dropped so suddenly that his breath turned to frost in front of him, and then he saw it, Reflected in the window, he wasn't looking at the dark tunnel outside. He was staring at the station he had just left. And there, standing on the empty platform, was the man, smiling, waiting. Ethan's pulse surged. The train lurched, and the lights flickered violently. He was trapped. The last train of the night, the one that should have taken him home, had become a corridor into something far worse. Something alive, something patient, something hungry. He had no idea how long he had been staring when the train jolted again, throwing him against the wall. The man was closer now, impossibly so, a silent shadow moving faster than thought. Ethan's scream caught in his throat as he realized he couldn't leave the car. He couldn't escape, because this ride wasn't just taking him home, it was taking him somewhere else. Ethan's hands trembled as he clutched the wall, knuckles white against the metal. The train rattled through the pitch-black tunnel, the faint hum of its engines, now feeling like the growl of some ancient predator. The man's eyes dark, endless, impossible, were burned into Ethan's mind. He backed away slowly, searching for something, anything, to defend himself. His backpack hung off his shoulder like dead weight. He swung it around instinctively, but it passed through empty air. The man was gone, or maybe he had never truly been in front of him. The emergency light flickered once, bathing the car in a sickly yellow glow. Shadows stretched along the ceiling, twisting and crawling like living things. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. He felt like he was no longer on a train at all. A whisper came then, soft, almost a sigh. Ethan, he spun around, but the car was empty again. The benches were empty. The floor beneath him creaked. Nothing moved. His mind raced. No, this isn't real, he muttered, backing into the corner. It's just tiredness, stress, cold. But the whisper came again, louder, and this time there was more than one voice. Ethan. A shadow shifted at the far end of the car. He couldn't see it. Clearly just a ripple of darkness against darkness. The air grew colder, colder than anything he'd ever felt. His breath fogged, and his teeth chattered uncontrollably. Then the tapping started again, slow, deliberate, echoing against the steel walls. Tap, tap, tap. Ethan pressed himself to the floor, eyes wide, trying to make himself small, trying to disappear, but the tapping moved closer. Something was coming toward him, something that didn't walk, didn't run. It glided, a flash of movement. The man's eyes appeared at the far end, glowing faintly in the dim light, impossibly large, impossibly still, and then another, and another. Shadows began to form, faces in the corners of the car, twisted, distorted, watching him. Some whispered in voices that sounded like family members, friends, strangers, long dead. Ethan scrambled backward, clutching the cold metal pole. His mind screamed for logic, for reason. This is impossible. I'm losing it. Just a dream. Just a hallucination. But deep down, he knew the truth. This was real. The train lurched again, and Ethan tumbled too. The floor, the lights flickered violently, then went out entirely. Pitch black. Absolute darkness. He could hear the tapping now, all around him, circling him. The whispers grew louder, incomprehensible, yet somehow intimate. Names he had never heard, but that sounded like they belonged to him. And then, he felt it. Breath, warm, foul, close to his neck. A hand brushed against his shoulder. He spun around, empty, nothing. A voice hissed in his ear. "Don't try to leave," he screamed, a raw, terrified sound that bounced off the steel walls of the car. The lights flickered back on, and there he was, standing right in front of him. Not walking, not gliding, just there. Taller now, his face stretched unnaturally, his grin wider, impossibly wide, his eyes never blinking. Ethan stumbled back, his back hitting the wall. He pounded the emergency intercom, desperate for help, someone, anyone. Static. Then a cold, Metallic click. Silence. The man tilted his head, cocking it in a way that shouldn't have been physically possible. And then he smiled, that same wide, impossibly stretched smile, leaning closer. Ethan felt the cold brush of icy fingers against his forehead. He screamed again. Then the train jolted violently, slamming him into the floor. The lights flickered one last time before plunging the car into darkness again. And in that darkness, the whispers began to chant, "Ethan, stay, forever." A heedless, suffocating pressure closed in on him. The walls seemed to bend inward. The shadows weren't shadows anymore. They were alive, moving, crawling, pressing. He tried to scream, but the sound caught in his throat. The train lurched, faster, deeper, and the whispers became voices screaming in unison. He clawed at the doors, at the windows, at the steel poles. Nothing worked, and then, silence. Ethan opened his eyes. The car was empty. The lights were back, on the shadows gone. The man was gone. For a second, Ethan thought he had survived. Relief washed over him, but then he heard it, the whisper, soft, right behind him. Next stop, Brooklyn Bridge. Ethan turned slowly. He shouldn't have. The figure was back, standing at the far end of the car, grinning, eyes larger than ever, shadows stretching, like tendrils from his body, crawling across the floor toward Ethan. He realized then, it wasn't a man, it wasn't human, and whatever it was patient, it had all night. Ethan's legs refused to move. His body felt like stone, his heart hammering so violently it seemed ready to burst. The figure at the far end of the car didn't blink, didn't move, but the shadows crawling along the floor twisted and stretched toward him, as if alive. The air grew colder still, freezing every exhale into white mist. He stumbled backward, colliding with the wall. The train lurched again, and Ethan lost his footing, sliding along the floor. The emergency lights flickered overhead, casting grotesque shadows that danced and whispered. He could swear he heard distant laughter, soft, cruel, and impossibly close. Brooklyn Bridge. The whisper hissed again, stretching into a chorus of voices. Don't leave. The train slowed, approaching the station. Ethan's relief at seeing the familiar lights of the platform turned into dread. The platform was empty, not a single soul. No commuters, no security guards. Nothing, just darkness stretching into the tunnels. The figure stepped forward, moving in a way that no human could. Its body seemed to bend, twisting unnaturally as it glided closer. The grin stretched wider. The Isodo's eyes burned into Ethan's mind. He felt frozen, paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of it. The train screeched to a halt. The doors hissed open. Ethan thought for a moment, if he could just escape, if he could jump off the platform. He did. But the moment his foot hit the edge of the platform, the world went wrong. The station had changed. The lights flickered violently. Shadows pooled and thickened along the walls, forming shapes that writhed and stretched like living nightmares. The figure wasn't behind him on the train anymore, it was on the platform. Its head cocked, grin wider than any human mouth should allow. Ethan stumbled backward, trying to run, but the platform seemed to stretch endlessly. Every step he took only led him further from the stairs. The shadows twisted around him, brushing his skin, whispering words he couldn't understand, yet somehow felt like names from his past, names he thought he'd forgotten. Ethan, stay. The voice came from everywhere at once. It was close, it was far, it was inside his head. He turned a corner, desperate to find the stairs, the exit, anything, when he saw a train parked at the other side of the platform. Its doors were open, no lights inside, no sound, and standing there, waiting, was another figure, exactly like the first. The same stretched grin, the same impossible eyes, the same twisting shadow tendrils. Ethan froze. Panic roared through him like a wildfire. There was no logic here, no escape. Every station, Every turn of the train, every attempt to flee, only led him deeper into the nightmare. The first figure began moving toward him, faster this time, gliding as though the platform itself carried it. The shadow stretched and reached, brushing against Ethan's clothes, cold and sticky, like oil. He could feel their pull, tugging at him, trying to drag him toward the grinning face. Desperate, Ethan darted toward the train at the far end. He leaped inside, slamming the doors behind him. The car was empty. For a moment, relief surged. Then the lights flickered and he saw it. Hundreds of shadows now crawling along the ceiling, the walls, the floor. Shapes of people, but wrong. Limbs bent in impossible angles. Faces stretched and melted like wax. They whispered and hissed in 1,000 voices. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps. He fumbled for the emergency intercom. "Somebody, anybody, please. There's something here." Static. Then, nothing. The train lurched forward. The whispering intensified. He could feel eyes on him. Dozens, hundreds, all pressing in. And in the corner, the first figure appeared again. Grinning, moving impossibly fast, its shadowy tendrils crawling toward him. Ethan realized then, with bone-deep terror, it wasn't just one. There were more, and they weren't going to stop. The train picked up speed, plunging deeper into darkness. Ethan's mind screamed for escape, for sanity, for anything real, but there was none. Only the shadows, the whispers, the grinning figures, and the endless, nightmarish corridors of the subway. And somewhere, in the distance, the faint sound of a train bell. Or was it a scream? He couldn't tell anymore. All he knew, he wasn't getting out alive. Not tonight. The train screeched around a bend, plunging Ethan into a darkness that felt alive. The shadows clung to the walls, crawling, twisting, reaching toward him with fingers that didn't exist. The whispers had grown into a chorus, chanting, mocking, echoing his name over and over. Ethan's legs moved on their own, carrying him forward as though his body were a puppet. He stumbled through the car, trying doors, windows, anything, but every escape route led to more darkness, more impossibilities. The train itself seemed to stretch endlessly, every turn opening into another identical car, another corridor of despair. And then he saw it, the first figure, perched atop a seat, staring down at him with that impossibly wide grin. Its shadow tendrils had multiplied, writhing across the floor and ceiling like living veins. The air was icy, suffocating, pressing down on him with unnatural weight. Ethan scrambled backward. His eyes darted to a small emergency exit at the end of the car. It was his only chance. He sprinted, limbs trembling, and yanked the handle. The door refused to budge. The whispers surged in response, louder, more insistent, invading his skull. "Ethan, you belong here." Another movement caught his eye. Across the car, a new figure had appeared, taller this time, eyes blacker than the void, grin wider, limbs longer, twisting impossibly. Ethan felt bile rise in his throat. How many were there? How many more could emerge from the shadows? The train lurched violently, hurling him to the floor. The lights flickered one last time before plunging the car into complete blackness. In the dark, he could hear them moving around him, whispering, laughing, gliding closer. Every shadow now had a face. Every face stared at him with empty, gaping eyes. Ethan clawed at the floor, at the walls, desperate for something solid, anything real. He felt the icy tendrils brush against his legs. Panic surged. He screamed, a raw, desperate sound that bounced off the steel walls of the train. Then the train jolted again, violently, and the car doors opened. Ethan found himself on a platform he didn't recognize. No signs, no lights, just an endless expanse of darkness, broken only by dim emergency lights flickering in the distance. The air was heavy, thick, and smelled of something rotten. Ethan stumbled forward. The shadows followed him, twisting around, his legs tugging at him. whispering promises of pain, fear, and death. Ahead, he saw a staircase leading upward. His heart leaped an exit, a way out. But as he ran toward it, he realized something impossible. The stairs weren't leading to the surface. They led downward, into the darkness beneath the city. The whispers grew louder, 1,000 voices chanting, "Stay, stay, stay." Ethan tried to turn back, but the platform behind him had vanished. The shadows had formed a solid wall, writhing and pulsating, preventing retreat. His only option was to descend. He clutched the railing, stepping carefully into the abyss. The steps seemed to stretch endlessly, descending deeper than any subway map should allow. The air grew colder, thicker, making it hard to breathe, and then he saw them. Hundreds of figures, all grinning, all twisted, all impossibly tall, moving in the shadows. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the emergency lights in a way that made Ethan's skin crawl. They didn't walk, they drifted, hovering above the ground, gliding closer with unnatural speed. Ethan's mind screamed, "This isn't real. This isn't real." But it was. Every sensation, every touch, every whisper confirmed it. He was trapped in a place where reality had no hold. The deeper he descended, the more he realized the horrifying truth. The subway itself was alive. The train, the platforms, the tunnels, they were all feeding on fear, and he was prey. The first figure emerged from the shadows again, closer now, grin stretching impossibly wide, eyes boring into his soul. Its tendrils reached toward him, brushing his shoulders, his arms, sending chills through his entire body. Ethan stumbled down the last step, or, at least, he thought it was the last. The darkness opened up into a massive cavern beneath the city. The train tracks twisted impossibly, looping back on themselves, vanishing into shadow. Figures moved in the distance, dozens, hundreds, yet none of them human. And in the center, the train waited, doors open, as if inviting him to step inside. Ethan knew, in a cold, unrelenting certainty, that the nightmare wasn't over. It had just begun, because whatever this place was, whatever the figures were, they didn't want him to escape. They wanted him, forever. Ethan's legs trembled as he stepped into the cavern beneath the city. The ground was cold, slick with something he couldn't identify. The air smelled of rust and decay, thick and oppressive. The train waited ahead, doors open as if inviting him in, but he knew better. The shadows shifted, writhing along the cavern walls, whispering his name, in voices that seemed to come from inside his own skull. His eyes darted around. Every figure he had seen or thought he had seen was there. Hundreds, maybe thousands, all staring, grinning, waiting, and then one moved. The first figure, taller and more grotesque than he remembered, glided toward him, its limbs bent in impossible angles. Its grin stretched wider, impossibly wide, teeth jagged and blackened. Tendrils of shadow reached out, brushing against Ethan's face, freezing his blood. He stumbled backward, almost falling into the black abyss beneath the cavern floor. The air vibrated with whispers, now louder, harsher, almost screaming. Ethan's mind raced. He had to escape, somehow, anything. But every exit was swallowed by shadows, every route blocked by figures that shouldn't exist. He ran toward the train, praying it might be a way out. But as he approached, the first figure stepped into his path. The shadows coalesced into its body, forming additional limbs, twisting shapes, grotesque faces pressed against it, all whispering, screaming, laughing. Ethan froze. His breath came in ragged gasps. The figure's eyes bore into him, and he felt his soul being weighed, measured, stripped bare. A cold, unnatural pressure pressed down on his chest, suffocating him. Then it spoke. Ethan. The voice was deep, resonant, layered with hundreds of others, echoing through the cavern. "You cannot leave. You are ours." Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run. He lunged to the side, narrowly avoiding a tendril that shot toward him like a whip. He scrambled toward the cavern walls, trying to find any crack, any crevice, any chance of escape. But the walls weren't walls, they were shadows, twisting and writhing, alive, closing in. Behind him, the whispers escalated into a cacophony, hundreds of voices screaming, "Stay! Stay! Stay!" Panic surged. He slid across the slick floor, skidding to a stop at the edge of a pit that seemed to lead into endless darkness. He looked up and saw it. The cavern stretched higher than any station should, the ceiling lost in shadows. Figures clung to the walls, to the ceiling, their grins impossibly wide, their eyes unblinking, and then one stepped forward, separate from the others. It was smaller, yet faster, moving with terrifying precision. It lunged at him with a tendril that shot like a spear, brushing his arm. Pain erupted, icy and burning at the same time. Ethan screamed, stumbling backward, nearly falling into the pit. He grabbed the edge and hauled himself up, adrenaline surging. Every step he took was mirrored by shadows moving around him, circling him, anticipating his every move. The cavern floor began to shift. Shadows writhed, rising like waves, forming walls, corridors, traps. The exit the train seemed to move farther away with every step. The cavern itself was alive, feeding on his fear, shaping reality to trap him. Ethan's mind raced. He needed a plan, anything. Then he noticed something, a faint light, far above the cavern, shimmering like a star through the oppressive darkness. Hope surged, fragile but undeniable. He sprinted toward it, ignoring the tendrils that reached for his legs, clawing at him, whispering, laughing. The shadows screamed in protest, twisting and writhing, forming impossible shapes. Faces that melted and reformed in grotesque mockery. And then he felt it, a presence behind him, colder than the shadows, heavier than the cavern itself. The first figure had caught up, its grin wider than ever, tendrils wrapping around the air near him, preventing escape. Ethan knew, with terrifying clarity, that he couldn't outrun it. Not here. Not in this place. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. There was only one way, one chance, and he would have to face it. Ethan's chest burned as he ran, the icy tendrils of shadow brushing against his arms and legs, freezing his blood. Each step felt heavier, as if the cavern itself were resisting him. Above, the faint glimmer of light, the only hope, flickered, taunting him from the abyss. The first figure moved faster now, no longer gliding. It seemed to almost teleport in bursts, appearing closer each time he looked back. Its grin stretched impossibly, its eyes endless voids of hunger. Ethan stumbled, crashing to the cavern floor, and for a moment, panic overtook him entirely. But then he remembered something, a spark of instinct. The shadows responded to fear. Every scream, every flinch, every tremor only strengthened them. If he wanted to survive, he had to stop running. He had to face them. Ethan rose, trembling violently, and took a shaky breath. Okay, I'm not afraid," he whispered. His voice trembled, but he forced it steady. I'm not afraid." The shadows recoiled slightly, as if tasting defiance for the first time. The first figure paused, tilting its head, analyzing him, its grin stretching even wider, mocking. Ethan's mind raced. The cavern floor was slick, but there were fragments of debris, old subway signs, broken benches, scattered metal poles. He grabbed a piece of jagged metal, holding it like a weapon, though he knew it would do little against the figure itself. The first figure lunged, its tendrils whipped at him, slicing through the air with unnatural speed. Ethan swung the metal pole blindly, connecting with a tendril. It hissed a cold, electric sound and recoiled, then struck again. Pain exploded across Ethan's arm, but he held firm. The cavern seemed to respond to his defiance. Shadows retreated from him slightly, flickering and twisting, giving him space. He realized the cavern wasn't just feeding on fear. It was alive, yes, but it could be resisted, even if only for a moment. Ethan jabbed at the figure, screaming in defiance. The shadowy tendrils recoiled, and for the first time, he saw movement behind it. Other figures, hundreds, frozen. The light above flickered brighter, and the whispers weakened slightly, replaced by a low growl that vibrated in his chest. He ran toward the light, using the metal pole to push shadows aside, forcing his way upward. The first figure lunged again, and this time he struck it directly in the chest. Its form wavered, glitching like a corrupted image, tendrils dissolving into the darkness before reforming. "Not today," Ethan shouted, lungs burning, adrenaline screaming. The light above grew larger, warmer, piercing the suffocating cold. Shadows hissed in protest, retreating, twisting, vanishing into the cavern walls. The first figure screamed a sound that was impossibly human and inhuman at the same time. It shrieked, and then, for a brief moment, paused. Ethan scrambled the last few steps, grabbing onto the metal railing of a stairwell carved from the cavern itself. The light bathed his face. For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt hope. The first figure recoiled, its tendrils flailing, its grin twisting in rage. It raised its hand as if to strike him again, but the light burned through it, dissolving part of its form. The shadows recoiled, screeching and hissing. Ethan didn't stop. He climbed, using the stairwell like a lifeline, pulling himself closer to the light, closer to reality, or at least the semblance of it. Behind him, the cavern rumbled, as if the very earth beneath the city were angry at his escape. As he neared the top, the first figure made one final attempt, lunging, tendrils flailing wildly. Ethan felt a cold brush across his back, a final warning. But he pushed through, reaching the platform above, and then, silence. The cavern, the shadows, the figures all gone. He was standing on a platform bathed in flickering fluorescent lights, an ordinary subway platform in New York. The train doors ahead of him were open, empty. For a moment, relief washed over him. But when Ethan turned to look back, he saw it. A single tendril of shadow, creeping along the wall, just at the edge of the platform, and then a whisper soft, deliberate, unmistakable. "We are always waiting, Ethan." He swallowed hard, heart still hammering, adrenaline surging. The nightmare wasn't over, not by a long shot. Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself. Whatever this thing was, whatever the shadows were, he had survived. For now, but he knew one thing with chilling certainty. The subway was alive, and it wanted more. And Ethan Cole had only just begun to fight. Ethan's legs ached, his heart hammering as he tried to steady his breathing. The platform was eerily silent, the fluorescent lights flickering above him like a stuttering pulse. The train doors ahead stood open, empty, but the air felt wrong. Heavy, thick, almost alive. He stepped forward cautiously, every muscle tensed. The shadows from the cavern beneath seemed to cling to the edges of the platform, thin tendrils curling along the walls, reaching, watching. The whispering had stopped, or at least, it was faint, replaced by the low hum of the subway's ventilation. Ethan knew better. This wasn't over. The subway had rules he didn't understand, and breaking them had consequences. He had survived the first attack, but that was only a fraction of the horror lurking beneath New York. He moved toward the station exit, scanning the signs for a clue to where he was. The platform name glowed faintly. Chambers Street, a normal station, ordinary. But the chill in the air told him this station was anything but ordinary. As he walked, he noticed something strange. The advertisements along the walls, typical subway posters, were warped. Faces stared back at him, grinning, melting into one another. Words scrawled across them in black ink, letters that seemed to shift as he tried to focus. "You cannot leave." Ethan's stomach turned. He rubbed his eyes, telling himself it was exhaustion, hallucination, but the words didn't vanish. They waited, watching him. Then he heard it, the metallic screech of a train approaching. Relief surged. Perhaps another car, another chance to escape. But when the train pulled in, he froze. The car was blacked out, windows dark as coal. The doors slid open slowly, revealing nothing but shadow. And standing at the threshold, waiting for him, were dozens of figures, tall, twisted, grinning, each one more grotesque than the last. Their eyes were voids, infinite and cold. Ethan's breath caught. He knew the train wasn't real. Not truly. It was part of the subway's trap, a lure, a way to draw him deeper into the labyrinth. And the figures, they weren't human. Not anymore. He backed away, heart hammering. The shadows on the walls stretched toward him, forming faces, mouths opening and closing silently. Hissing his name, then he saw I-10 old maintenance room tucked behind the platform doors. A glimmer of hope. Perhaps there were stairs, or a service elevator, or a way up to the street. He ran for it. The figures didn't follow him, not immediately. They waited, patient, as if savoring the hunt, but the shadows were faster. Tendrils shot out from the walls and floor, brushing his arms, legs, chest. Ethan yelped, tearing himself free, slamming the door behind him. The room was small, cramped, filled with old tools and dusty equipment. A ladder led upward through a trap door, and a faint light spilled from above. He didn't hesitate. He climbed as he pushed open the trapdoor. He realized something chilling. He wasn't on the street. He was in another part of the underground, a maintenance corridor that twisted impossibly, stretching farther than the subway maps allowed. Pipes ran overhead, dripping water. Shadows pooled along the walls, moving independently of the light. And on the wall, etched deep into the concrete, were words. The subway remembers. The subway waits. The subway takes. Ethan swallowed hard, heart hammering. He didn't know what the subway was, but he knew it was alive, and it had root. He had already broken. A sound made him jump, a soft, scraping noise, like metal dragging across steel. He turned, heart in his throat. From the darkness emerged a figure, not the first, but something different. Taller, wider, its grin stretching impossibly from ear to ear. Its eyes, there were too many, hundreds, swirling across its face like a whirlpool. Ethan froze. The shadows in the corridor responded, twisting toward this new figure, as if it commanded them. The whispers returned, a chorus now, chanting, "He is ours. He is ours. He is ours." Ethan backed away slowly, trying to memorize the corridor, searching for another exit. But the layout shifted, walls bending, turning corridors into impossible paths. Every choice led deeper, every turn closer to the waiting nightmare. And then, he understood, terrifyingly clearly. This subway wasn't just alive, it was sentient. It remembered every trespasser, every fear, every mistake. It adapted, it hunted, and tonight it had chosen him. The figure moved closer, tendrils stretching, grasping, wrapping the corridor in shadow. Ethan's mind raced. He had to escape, but how do you flee from something that knows the tunnels better than you? Something that is the tunnels. The whispers rose to a scream, filling the corridor. Ethan's vision blurred. The air grew heavier, thicker. Every breath burned. He realized he had only one chance. He had to fight back. Not with weapons, not with speed, but with willpower. Fear had been the subway's tool. If he could resist, maybe, just maybe, he could survive. Ethan took a deep breath. He planted his feet, clenched his fists, and screamed back into the darkness, "I am not afraid." For a heartbeat, everything froze. The figure halted. The shadows paused. Even the dripping water stilled. And then, the corridor began to change. Walls twisted, shadows recoiled, and the faintest glimpse of light appeared at the far end. But Ethan knew better than to hope. The subway was patient. It would wait. It would return. And when it did, he might not be so lucky. Ethan's scream echoed through the twisting corridor, his defiance shaking the air itself. The shadows recoiled for just a heartbeat, but that heartbeat wasn't enough. The figure ahead moved, sliding like liquid, tendrils stretching impossibly long, wrapping around pipes and walls, snapping back with lightning speed. Its hundreds of eyes followed him, burning into his soul. Ethan ran. Every step echoed against concrete walls that warped and stretched. Every breath was heavy, thick with the metallic temps of fear. He didn't know where he was going, only that forward was the only option. The corridor twisted sharply. Pipes overhead leaked water, each drop sounding like a gunshot. Shadows flickered in every direction, some independent of the figure, writhing, reaching, clawing. He darted into a side passage, hoping it might lead to a stairwell or an emergency exit. But the corridor had changed. The side passage wasn't a dead end, it was a trap. The walls stretched impossibly, closing in, narrowing. Tendrils lashed at his legs, wrapping around his ankles, dragging him down. He kicked and screamed, breaking free. But the shadows were relentless. Then came the whispering, louder, more insistent, everywhere at once. "We are the tunnels. You cannot leave. You belong here." Ethan's lungs burned. His legs trembled. He could feel the figure closing in, slower now, but patient like a predator, savoring its prey. Then he noticed something: faint markings along the walls, scratched into the concrete, symbols, repeated over and over, a pattern in the chaos. He slowed slightly, trying to memorize them. They seemed to pulse faintly, glowing as if alive. Perhaps they were a guide or a warning. He traced them with his eyes, praying they would lead him somewhere safe. The figure lunged suddenly, its shadow tendrils slashing toward him. Ethan dove sideways, scraping along the wall, narrowly avoiding contact. Pain shot up his arm, but he pushed forward, following the markings. Twisting and turning through the impossible maze, the corridor opened into a massive chamber. Unlike anything in the subway system, the ceiling arched impossibly high, lost in shadows. Broken train cars hung at angles above him, tracks twisted and warped. Shadows clung to every surface, moving independently, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to mock him. And in the center of the chamber, waiting, were dozens of figures. Not just the first one, hundreds, all grinning, all twisting, all watching him. Their tendrils stretched toward him, writhing in anticipation. Ethan froze. Panic surged. This was it, the heart of the subway, the lair where fear itself lived. He could feel it pressing down on him, heavy and suffocating, feeding on every heartbeat. Then he saw a small light on the far side of the chamber, a maintenance door, cracked slightly, spilling a thin stream of white light. Salvation or a trap? He couldn't tell. He sprinted. Shadows lunged, tendrils slashing, brushing his skin, freezing him in place for moments that felt like hours. The whispers escalated to a deafening roar, 1,000 voices screaming, laughing, shrieking his name. Ethan dove through the doorway, slamming it behind him. The light inside was blinding, warm, and as real as anything had felt in hours. He pressed his back against the door, gasping, trembling, hearing the muffled sound of the figures outside, whispering, waiting, patient, for the first time. He allowed himself a shaky breath, but the fear didn't leave him. Not really, not here, not now. He knew the subway had rules, and breaking them only led him deeper. He knew the figures were patient. They would wait, they would follow, and then, from somewhere in the shadows, behind him, he heard it, a soft, deliberate tap, and a whisper, closer than ever. "You cannot hide, Ethan." Ethan's back pressed against the door, chest heaving, sweat and grime slick on his skin. The light from the small maintenance room was a fragile barrier between him and the nightmare outside. Every shadow in the cavern seemed to pulse, writhing, as if alive. The whispering had grown louder again, more urgent, almost desperate. He didn't have time to rest. Every second spent hiding allowed the subway to gather, to adapt. The first figure, the one with hundreds of eyes, would not let him escape. And the chamber outside, the tunnel beyond, it was alive. It knew him. It could feel his fear, taste it, feed on it. Ethan forced himself to move, crawling toward a set of stairs that led deeper into the maintenance room. At the top, a trapdoor offered a faint glimmer of daylight toward, at least something resembling the real world. He pushed the door open slowly. What he saw made him freeze. He wasn't on a street or a normal station. He was on a train platform unlike any he had ever seen, vast and impossibly long. Tracks twisted and looped into shadows that vanished into infinity. Above, the ceiling arched impossibly high, lost in darkness. And below, in the tunnels, the shadows gathered, hundreds of figures writhing, merging, splitting, waiting. Ethan's stomach churned. He realized the horrifying truth. The subway wasn't just alive. It wasn't just feeding on fear. It was fear, incarnate, a sentient predator, and he was trapped inside its body. From the darkness, the first figure emerged, its grin stretched, impossibly wide, eyes swirling with void. Tendrils reached for him, brushing against the platform, freezing him in place. And then the whispers spoke, not in hundreds of voices, but one. You cannot leave. You are part of us now. Ethan's hands shook. He realized the figure wasn't just a predator, was a conductor, a guardian, a manifestation of the subway's will. If he wanted to survive, he couldn't run. Not anymore. He noticed the train tracks ahead, looping through the shadows. The tracks weren't ordinary, they shimmered faintly, marked with strange symbols, glowing like runes. He understood instinctively. The train could be his escape or his doom. He ran toward the nearest car, heart pounding, the whispering crescendoing around him. The shadows surged, a tidal wave of darkness, but he pressed on, diving into the car just as the figure lunged. Tendrils scraped the metal doors as they closed behind him. Inside, the car was empty, silent, normal or almost normal. The emergency lights flickered, illuminating torn seats and scratched walls. Ethan collapsed into a seat, trembling. He couldn't stay here long. The subway could reach him anywhere. And then he saw it, a journal, lying on the floor of the car, old, leather-bound, worn with age. He picked it up, flipping through pages filled with scrawled notes, diagrams of tunnels, sketches of figures, and desperate warnings. The subway is alive. It hunts fear. It remembers. Escape is possible, but only if you face it. The conductor is the heart. Destroy Etor. It will destroy you. Ethan's blood ran cold. The first figure, the conductor, waited for him outside. It had tracked him here, guiding him, testing him, shaping him into prey. But now he had a clue. He had a plan, fragile, desperate, but a plan nonetheless. He scanned the journal, memorizing symbols, maps, and rituals. The notes hinted at a single possibility. He could fight the subway on its own terms, inside its heart, but it would be dangerous. More dangerous than anything he had faced. Failure meant death. The train lurched suddenly, plunging into darkness, the car rattling violently. Shadows pressed against the windows, forming faces, hands, mouths that whispered his name. Ethan gripped the journal, steeling himself. He had no choice. The conductor was waiting. The subway had him in its grip. The next step would decide whether he survived or became another ghost in the tunnels, another whisper in the shadows. Ethan whispered to himself, I face it. I will not run. I will not be afraid. And with that, he stepped onto the train's corridor, heading straight for the heart of the nightmare. Ethan gripped the leather-bound journal as the train rattled violently through the tunnels. Shadows pressed against the windows, forming faces, and hands, whispering his name, mocking him, testing him. Every instinct screamed to run, to hide, but he knew there was no hiding. The conductor waited, deep in the heart of the subway, and only confrontation could save him. The train plunged into darkness. The air grew thick, almost solid, pressing against his chest. The whispers crescendoed, 1,000 voices shouting at once. You cannot leave. You are ours. You belong to the tunnels. Ethan forced himself to focus. He repeated the words from the journal, the symbols he had memorized. Fear had been the subway's weapon. Defiance was his. Every step forward burned with adrenaline. Last, the train slowed. The car doors slid open, revealing the cavernous heart of the subway. Ethan froze. The space was impossible walls, stretching into black infinity, tracks spiraling into unseen depths, and above all, the conductor, a towering figure, grin impossibly wide, hundreds of eyes swirling across its face. Its tendrils of shadow writhed like snakes, coiling around the chamber, moving with a life of their own. Ethan stepped forward, clutching the journal. I will not be afraid, he whispered, voice shaking but firm. The conductor tilted its head, observing him, as if testing his resolve. You cannot resist, it hissed. 1,000 voices layered into one. You are part of us. You always were. Ethan drew a deep breath. He had no weapons, no tools, only will, courage, and knowledge gleaned from the journal. The symbols glowed faintly on the floor, etched into the tiles of the chamber. He began tracing them, chanting the incantations he had memorized, every syllable burning with determination. The shadows recoiled, screaming, thrashing against the force of the ritual. The conductor lunged, tendrils slashing toward him, eyes blazing. Ethan dodged, chanting louder, stepping through the glowing symbols. The air shimmered, the cavern shaking. Shadows screamed, faces twisted, melting, reforming. Tendrils reached for Ethan, brushing him, trying to pull him into the darkness, but he pressed on. Every word he spoke, every symbol he traced, weakened the conductor. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Ethan faced the heart of the subway, the sentient nightmare that had haunted him for hours. The conductor roared, a sound both human and inhuman, tendrils flailing wildly, and then, light, blinding, white, purifying light. The symbols flared, etched into the walls, floor, and ceiling. The shadows writhed, twisted, screamed, and then began to dissolve, evaporating into nothingness. The conductor shrieked, its grin stretching impossibly wide, in final defiance. You cannot win. It howled, but the chant continued. The ritual held. With a final deafening scream, the conductor exploded into darkness, the shadows collapsing like smoke in wind. Silence, absolute, crushing silence. Ethan collapsed, too, the ground, trembling, gasping for breath. The cavern began to dissolve around him. The train, the tracks, the twisted tunnels, they all faded. When he opened his eyes, he was standing on a normal subway platform, daylight filtering through a nearby exit. For a moment, he thought he had survived. He had beaten the subway. He had escaped. And then, he felt it. A tendril of shadow brushed his ankle, faint, almost imperceptible, and a whisper, soft but unmistakable, filled his ear. We are always waiting. Ethan froze. His victory was real. Yes, but the subway was patient. It remembered. It waited. And somewhere beneath the streets of New York, it was still alive, still hungry, still watching. Ethan staggered toward the exit, heart pounding, knowing one terrifying truth. He had survived this night, but the metro shadows never truly let go. As he emerged into the daylight, the city bustling around him, he glanced back once more at the station entrance. For a brief second, in the shadows of the tracks below, he saw a pair of glowing eyes and a grin stretching impossibly wide. The nightmare was over, for now.